back, darlings, to the podcast Life Looks Different Now. I'm your host, Slandy Noel. In this podcast, we focus on reading one chapter from the Bible every week, doing our best to decipher the Word of God, learning its rules, its laws, its principles, and apply them to our daily lives. Last week, we read from Genesis chapter 24. And from reading Genesis chapter 24, we learned that Abraham trusted one of his own servants, his long-serving servant, to go out back into his homeland to find Isaac a wife, because Abraham did not want Isaac to take a wife where he was living in the land of Canaan, because he realized that the Canaanites were not following God's rules, God's laws. And he wanted to make sure that whoever marries Isaac is a woman who is going to be able to influence Isaac to follow God's rules, to follow God, to serve God. So there he trusted his servant, and his servant found Isaac's wife, Rebecca. Now, this week, we are going to read Genesis chapter 25. Let's see what lesson we can learn from Genesis chapter 25. Now, before I go ahead to reading Genesis chapter 25, I have a favor to ask. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. As you and I are eager to learn the Word of God, others want to do the same. Please give them this wonderful gift, because the stories of the Bible are very fascinating stories, and they can really help all of us to live better, productive, and organized lives. Thank you in advance for your support. Now let's get on to reading Genesis chapter 25. Abraham's death and his descendants. Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shur. Jokshan fathered Sheba and Dedan. The sons of Dedan were Ashuram, Letushim, and Lumim, and the sons of Midian were Ephah, Enoch, Abida, and Eldah. All these were the children of Keturah. Abraham gave all he had to Isaac, but to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts. While he was still living, he sent them away from his son Isaac, eastward to the east country. These are the days of the years of Abraham's life, 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and he was gathered to his people. Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar, and the Hittites, east of Mamre, the field that Abraham purchased from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with Sarah, his wife. After the death of Abraham, God blessed Isaac, his son, and Isaac settled at Beer-lahai-roi. These are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Agar, the Egyptian, Sarah's servant, bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, named in the order of their birth. Nebaloi, the firstborn of Ishmael, and Kedar, Abil, Misham, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Adad, Tima, Jitor, Naphish, and Kedema. These are the sons of Ishmael, And these are their names, by their villages and by their encampments. 12 princes according to their tribes. These are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. He breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people. They settled from Avila to Shur, which is opposite Egypt and the direction of Assyria. He settled over against all his kinsmen. The birth of Esau and Jacob. These are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padamaram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. And Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife, because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. The children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it is thus, why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and the two peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." When her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy clock. So they called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Esau sells his birthright. Once, when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." Therefore his name was called Edom. Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright now." Esau said, "I am about to die. What use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear it to me now." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Now, Genesis chapter 25 is a very fascinating story. It truly is a fascinating story because this story here is giving us a lot of information about Abraham and the family dynamics, his whole lineage. And it's also letting us know that Abraham had many sons. You know, when I was younger, I didn't know that Abraham had many sons. When my father used to tell us the story of Abraham, I suppose he left out the part that Abraham had concubines and he had these sons. The chapter opened up with letting us know that Abraham took a new wife, Keturah, and she bore him 6 sons. And it's interesting because remember in Genesis chapter 24, you know, the chapter opened with letting us know that Abraham was on the brink of death. Like you thinking that Abraham's about to die, so he's very concerned. So that's why he sent out his servant in search of a bride for his son Isaac. Because remember, God has promised Abraham that he will be a father of many nations, right? And his son, his promised child, that the promised child that he had with Sarah will be the one to carry the lineage. He'll be the one to have the covenant, get passed on to, right? So, and here we are, the next chapter here, we learning that Abraham remarried. He married someone else after, Sarah died. And Abraham must have been around 135 years old when he married this young woman. And we know she was a young woman. She must have been very young because she bore him 6 sons. Now, I'm certain that she bore him more children than that. The Bible often, as we can see here, the Bible doesn't ever mention the women, unless there's a reason why that particular woman is being brought up, is being mentioned. Like, for example, the story of Rebecca, she was mentioned a few chapters prior because she was gonna be the woman who was gonna be chosen to marry Isaac. But here we can see Abraham had many sons. He had many children with Keturah, and they may also have had many, many daughters. But apparently, us women don't count. So that is why we can see here that the word is stressing on, Abraham's 6 sons with his new wife, Keturah. Then we learned that while Abraham was alive, so he had these sons with this new wife. While he's still alive, these boys are growing up, they're getting older, right? And while he was still alive, he sent them away to the east of where he was living. He sent them away from his sight with their mother, I'm sure, and gave them plenty of gifts. But he reserved his estate for Isaac, the son that he had with Sarah, the promised child. Then we learned that Abraham lived a full life and he died at the age of 175. So that tells us between the age of 135 to 175, Abraham lived another 40 years, right? If I'm doing my math correctly. Abraham lived another 40 years. So all these 6 sons that he had, they were all adult. They were adults. All these children were adults. He sent them away because he didn't want to have any conflict between his promised child Isaac from all these boys. So he wanted to make sure that everyone understand that his main estate was going to get passed on to Isaac because he was the promised child. Let's pause here for a minute. See, here's the thing that gets me, because as we're reading the chapter now, I understand that Isaac is the promised child. I get it. I understand the purpose of all of this, because clearly God chose Abraham, not because Abraham was worthy, not because Abraham was a perfect man, but because he found grace in God's eyes. God chose him. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I understand. But what I can't really understand is, why is it that everyone else had to suffer? Like, I just don't understand why is it that he take on a second wife, Keturah, and now her children cannot be giving the same opportunity, you see, because they were not chosen, not because they've done anything wrong, but because God did not want to have that covenant with them. So I couldn't help but wonder, why is it that Abraham didn't stay single? Like, I mean, seriously, he was 135 years old. Like, I'm just not understanding why he had to get remarried. Like, seriously, I know many Christians may go against me on this one, but I can't help but wonder, if we already know what needs to be done, like, Abraham has been giving this covenant. He's aware that Isaac is the chosen child. So why should everyone else have to suffer the trauma that they're not important? They're not as important. It's hard enough for Ishmael to have to endure that. Ishmael being the first child, the firstborn of Abraham. He had Ishmael with Agar. If we remember correctly, Agar was just a child that she was Sarah's slave, and Sarah gave her to Abraham to bear them a child. And once Sarah got pregnant and had Isaac, she basically threw they basically threw that whole, Agar and Ishmael out in the wilderness to figure things out on their own. Now we're seeing this whole thing repeating again, the same pattern, all this trauma. Abraham could have stayed single. There's really nothing that says that you have to get married, you have to be laying with women and have more children. And he did, you know what I mean? Like, to me, it's just like, it's demonstrating that at the end of the day, he was a man, and self-control was not something that he had mastered. Yes, I said it. Many may disagree, but it had to be said. You already know the deal. God already told you who your child, the promised child is. We've done enough, we've caused enough problems, enough trauma for others. It just goes to show how selfish we are in our human nature, where we don't think of others. We don't think of their well-being. We only so focus on our own human needs, our own physical needs, because to me, that's what it shows here. Correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe somebody knows something that I don't know. And here we are here, like he basically threw out these other boys, his other children. Yeah, he gave them gifts, but listen, you already know you're not as important. And that's something that these other children have to live with. So there's that. And what I found even more interesting is the fact that the text also said that Abraham's concubines' children were giving these gifts, which tell us that Abraham did not only have one concubine, and I suppose in that custom at that time period, that second wife did not have the same level of respect as the first wife, like Sarah. So we know that the first concubine was Agar. There are others who claim that the Agar and Keturah were the same women, but here in the text, there's nothing here that says that Agar and Keturah were the same women. Like, it just says that Agar was sent away with her son Ishmael, and now a third woman entered the scene, Keturah, who has more children. But nevertheless, we learned that Abraham was still, because he was chosen, God made him a promise. God will always fulfill that promise because it's in his nature to do that. You see? So Abraham died at 175 years, leaving his legacy in the hands of his sons Ishmael and Isaac, and they buried him. These two sons came alongside one another, and they buried Abraham next to Sarah, and the cave that Abraham had bought from the Hittites long ago when Sarah passed away. Clearly, he wanted to be buried with his beloved wife, understandably so. So he was buried with her. Isaac, of course, was so blessed with great fortune because he is the one who inherited the estate of his father Abraham, and he moved to Bel-Rahi Roy. I hope I am pronouncing this area correctly. I'm not sure, but he moved away. Then the story took a different turn to the generations of Abraham, his whole lineage, and what happened to these, his son's children. So it took a whole different turn. Now we first learn about Ishmael. We learned that Ishmael fathered 12 sons, just like promise, because that promise was given to Agar when she flew into the wilderness. When she was very pregnant, she was being mistreated, and Sarah was so cruel towards her that Agar ran away, almost died in the wilderness. There she was met by an angel, and she was promised that her son will be the father of 12 princes. And God again made the same promise to Abraham in regards to Ishmael when Abraham became very concerned of what was going to happen to Ishmael. And here we're learning that Ishmael did indeed father 12 sons who became tribal princes. They took over the whole territories from Avila to Shur, which is near the Egypt border, Assyria area. So Ishmael's children were did very well for themselves, very well for themselves, and they became prince. And we learned that Ishmael lived a very long life. Ishmael was 137 years old. He didn't live as long as his father because his father lived 175 years, but nevertheless, he lived to be a very, very old man. And at 137 years old, Ishmael took his last breath. He died. His people, his children, they buried him. They took care of him. And then the most groundbreaking thing happened in the story. We then learned that Isaac, now 60 years old, his wife, before we learned that his wife was barren. She couldn't have children. They were married for 20 years. She wouldn't bear any children because God has closed her womb for whatever reason. But remember, God had already promised Abraham that Isaac, the great nation will come out of Abraham. So Isaac being his only, heir in regards to the one who will carry out the covenant, we know that God will, of course, open Rebecca's womb. So we learned that Isaac went to the Lord and prayed for God to open Rebecca's womb, and God did exactly that. And 20 years later, we learned that Rebecca became pregnant with twins. Now, she didn't know she was pregnant with twins. The pregnancy was extremely difficult. Now, pregnancy is hard as it is. For any one of us who's ever been pregnant, we know how tiresome it could be. It's a beautiful thing being pregnant, knowing that you are growing life inside of you. But children, when you get pregnant, a pregnancy depletes you of all of your energy, all of your vitamins, because that baby needs it all, right? So naturally, pregnancy is tiresome as it is. It's hard on the body. But now we learned that this woman was pregnant with twins, and she didn't know she was pregnant with twins. It is the first time in the Bible, in Genesis, that we're learning that somebody had a set of twins. So she didn't know she was pregnant. The pregnancy was extremely stressful for her on her body. She couldn't take it anymore. So she took the matter to the Lord. She became so distressed that she went to God and she prayed to God. And there, God answered her. And God told Rebecca that, she was carrying two nations inside of her womb. One was stronger than the other. So that's the first time she's learning that one of the reasons why the pregnancy was so difficult is because she's carrying two nations, two different group of people. And they were constantly bickering, fighting with one another. Now, we know siblings fight. We know siblings, get into it. I'm the oldest of 6. So I know how things can get with a, family with other siblings and everybody's dealing with one another. Get very difficult. But these two children in Rebecca's room, it was a whole different ballgame. It wasn't even about siblings rivalry. That was about nations rivalry. Because these are two nations, two strong group of people who are totally different, who are going to have their own different customs, doing things their own way. And there, God told her that the elder will serve the younger child, the younger sibling. And lo and behold, when Rebecca gave birth to, when she gave birth to the twins, the first twin came out looking red and hairy. And so they named him Esau. But listen to this. Interestingly enough, there's the second twin emerging, clutching the heel of the firstborn. That's just to show you how bad the rivalry was. Even as babies, these two little babies, Jacob was clutching onto the heel of his older sibling, his older brother, Esau. It's fascinating to read that because you can see that Jacob was not willing to be left behind. he's coming out fighting for what he wants. He's coming out making sure that everyone gives him that level of respect that they're going to be giving to Esau. Then we learned that as the boys grew, Esau became a great hunter. So Esau was strong and very skillful. He became a great hunter, while Jacob preferred a quiet life. So naturally, he's a shepherd. He became a shepherd. Then we learned that Isaac favored the oldest child, Esau, because naturally they share something, together. Apparently they were both, skillful. They were both skillful hunters. They share the love of hunting. So naturally, Isaac, favored the oldest child. He loved Esau. That's what the word says. Then we learned that Rebekah favored Jacob. She loved Jacob. But listen, Rebekah was giving the revelation that her youngest child will be the one to lead. The elder child will be serving the oldest. So I can't help but wonder whether or not Rebekah shared that revelation with her husband, Isaac, because the word doesn't say that she did. It simply says that she favored the second child. So maybe she hang on to that revelation. She hang on to that truth, knowing that there will be huge conflict in the family and that her oldest son, Esau, will be serving the youngest. Maybe she held on to that knowledge. We don't know. But we know, because I can't help but wonder, is that why she favored Jacob? Maybe is that why she loved Jacob? So it's always fascinating to me when I hear parents, parents say they don't have a favorite child. I'm sorry to laugh, but and I've always said that it's not true. I'm a parent, and I have 2 children. Yes, indeed, there is such a thing as a favorite. I don't care what anyone say. Yes, there is. Because even God has favorites. That's what the word says. God favored Abraham and chose Abraham not because Abraham was special, not because Abraham was perfect. God chose Noah not because God made his choice. If God can have favorites, why wouldn't us, who are basic humans, not have favorites? It doesn't add up. And even here, the word is letting us know that these 2 parents, this couple, also have had favorites. It is what it is. And there we learned that Esau was coming in from the field hungry, very, he was like desperate for food. He wanted some food. And Jacob, and he went to his brother Jacob because he saw Jacob cooking this delicious stew. He can smell the stew, smell the aroma. And he's like, Jacob, give me some of that stew. I want some of that stew. Give it to me. And Jacob said, nah. I won't just give you the stew. See how bad the rivalry between those 2 were? So much so that Jacob noticed his brother hungry, and the brother is begging for food, that he's like, no, I'm not just going to feed you. I'm not just going to feed you. You're going to have to give me something. And Jacob told Esau, the only way you ever going to taste that stew is by selling your birthright. Now, for those of us who don't know what a birthright is, let me explain this. Because my father had to explain this to us when we were younger. I'm the oldest of 6. So there's 6 of us siblings, 3 boys, 3 girls, and I'm the oldest. But listen to this. According to the word of God, according to the Bible, me being the oldest, I'm basically irrelevant. Why? Because I am a female. I'm a woman. I don't matter. As you can see here, all the Genesis is only focusing on men. It's not talking about women. It's not talking, women cannot inherit any of these estates. We cannot inherit birthrights. So the birthright was always passed on to the oldest son, the firstborn son. And the way my father explained it to me, and I even had to go back and read it and so forth, and he's correct. So it's not only the estate that get passed on to that firstborn, because yes, all the other children will get something, but the estate that gets the vast majority of the estate gets passed on to the firstborn. But there's also a blessing that get passed on to that firstborn. And that's why the birthright is so important. There's a whole level of blessing because the covenant is to be carried out by that firstborn son. Not necessarily the firstborn, because now I'm like, yeah, it's the firstborn son, the son. So me being the oldest, even when my father was explaining, I remember asking him, I said, so what about me? Like, what does that mean? Like, I'm the oldest girl, but you just said only boys. He's like, yeah, that's the way it used to be then. That's not the way it is now, but that's the way it used to be then. So my brother David, technically, who is the third child, because I'm not even 2 years older than David. So I have the second child. The child that comes after me is a girl, and but the third child of my parents is a boy, and that's David. David would have been the one to carry out, to inherit the estate of my father, and the wealth and all the blessings. So he would have been the one to get that blessing. If we are talking about Old Testament time, right? Which that always bothered me. Because I remember asking my dad, well, why should that even be a thing? That should not be a thing. But that's the way it was. So the birthright comes with that huge blessing, which then passed on to all the generations of that firstborn child. Again, not because that child earned it, but it's because they were the oldest son. And here we are reading this here. Esau responded to Jacob, I am about to die. What's a birthright to me? And my father, every time my father used to, that's why he used to laugh and said that this is how foolish Esau was. He may have been big and strong, but he was not a thinker. He couldn't really see past his hunger. He was so concerned about the food, instant gratification. He just wanted something now. He did not really value his birthright. And he said, what's it to me? I don't really care. Then he sold his birthright for a bowl of stew. Jacob made him swear, and he swore that he didn't want the birthright. So when his father Isaac is going to die, he's basically saying that, I don't want the blessing from my dad. I don't want that estate from my dad. It's okay, you can have it. And the word says that Esau despised his birthright. He did not comprehend what it meant. And you see, oftentimes, we may have something so valuable. We may have a talent. We have something that costs a fortune, but we cannot even understand it. We cannot even value it. I heard recently of this gentleman who went to the flea market, and he bought a simple portrait, and for a couple of dollars. The owner of that portrait did not take the time to evaluate, the portrait, to make sure that it was not worth a fortune. Yet we find out the buyer later on find out the portrait was the portrait of a very famous, famous robber. And that portrait was worth over $5 million. And this gentleman bought it for $2 at the flea market. You see, when you cannot understand something, when you don't value something, just because you don't value it, doesn't mean that it's not valuable. And I try to even extend that to women all the time. Just because someone didn't treat you right, just because someone doesn't see your value, doesn't make you less than who you are still valuable. You're just in the wrong place. You're just in the hands of the wrong person. You're just dealing with a fool. So here we learn that Esau was just a fool. He would have been the one to have this birthright, but he sold his birthright for a bowl of stew. This young man was impulsive. He disregarded his birthright. And that was the most expensive, bowl stew in the history of mankind. The most expensive. This man sold something that was like life. And not only did that cause problem for him, but he basically destroyed his whole lineage. Every single person, all his children coming after him will suffer the consequences of that decision. He was impulsive. He was foolish. You see, all of us have made foolish decisions like that when we don't think. We sell ourselves short. We are so short-sighted. We can't see past this minute. And not only do we end up paying the consequences of our action for those actions, the future generations coming after us suffer due to our foolishness. I pray every day that God will give me wisdom to stop and think, before I make certain life choices. Because all of us have made some foolish decisions. All of us. I know I'm guilty of that. Today is my birthday. As I'm recording, this episode, my prayer really is that God will give me wisdom so I can make wiser choices in life. Give me wisdom, give me good health so I can watch my children grow up. Give me wonderful understanding so I can have empathy for others, so I can have patience for others. And of course, to grow my love, to give me more love so I can have, love others unconditionally. So important, because as we're reading Genesis here, we can see that so many of these individuals who did not understand the decisions they were making, who did not first seek wisdom, who did not stop and think, they themselves pay the consequences of their actions, but others who come after them also pay the consequences of these actions. Selling his birthright, the purchase of the most expensive bowl of stew in the history of the world. And we can see here the dynamics within Abraham's lineage remind us once again that our actions and choices have implications. Because had Abraham not disobeyed God, if Abraham did not go out there and have other children like Ishmael and marry this other young woman Keturah and have all these sons, there wouldn't be all this mess. There wouldn't be all these conflicts. Things would have been just the way God wanted it to be. See, God did not put us here on earth to struggle, to be fighting with one another. As you can see, God created, Adam and Eve and put them in the garden. The garden was perfect. And that's exactly why God did not want, specifically said to Adam, do not eat from the knowledge of good and evil. Because the minute you eat of it, the minute you know evil, evil will dominate your life. You see? And not only your life, but all the generations that come after you. And this is what's happening here. Abraham stepped out of God's covenant because he had doubts. He stepped out and he had all these sons, all these issues, all these problems arose, affecting his whole lineage. Now we have Isaac, having his twins, and now we have two nations, yet they're brothers. And now these nations are going to be going against one another. So what did we learn this week? For me, it's really understanding not to move in impulse, not to make decisions impulsively, to think, to think. Again, we are in chapter 25 of Genesis all along. All of this, all that we've been learning is stop and think. Stop and think. Before we make certain decisions, think twice. We can go back to the story of Lot. Think twice. The story of Abraham, the story of Noah and his sons, even the story of, Adam and Eve. Think twice, because our actions, our choices, our life choices have implications. So I hope you learned something as well. Leave a comment below and let me know, what are your takes on all of this? Am I being harsh for saying that Abraham had no business having more sons, knowing what he already knew, knowing that Isaac was going to be it? Do you have any empathy at all for his siblings who gets to live their whole lives knowing that they are not as important, that they don't get to carry out, Abraham's lineage, really, in that sense, and they don't really get to inherit the covenant that Abraham had from the Lord, and they don't even get to inherit his true estate. They don't get the blessings that Isaac got. And again, I have to ask you, do you believe that parents do have, favorites, or is it only me? Anyway, leave your comments below and let me know your thoughts. Again, thank you so much for tuning in this week and reading this chapter with me. And I hope you have a marvelous week, darling. I'll be praying for you this week, praying that God will bless you with wisdom and understanding. Just I'm praying for my own self as I get to celebrate, I get to rejoice in having had another year around the sun. It's a blessing. I'll be praying for you. Until next time, darlings, bisous.